So as I mentioned, we are going to pivot, and we are going to have a roundtable. So this should be pretty interesting experience, because what we're going to do is Will, who spoke earlier from Forbes Ignite, the Chief Strategy Officer, is going to be our moderator. So he's going to be doing this virtually, but we do have a few individuals that will be here in person with us and will be able to field some questions. Really, the theme of this is to explore how companies, how customers, and how essentially we've seen successes and failure in the data science and AI world, and really get different views. So we've got some great individuals that will be joining us today. First, I'd like to introduce, you'll see virtually, Will, welcome back. And we also have Vivek with us, Vivek Saran, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Belle Tire. Vivek introduced and integrated really cutting-edge marketing technologies and machine learning and advanced analytics and decision-making into Belle Tire. He's had over 20 years as a strategic leader in several marketing firms and specializing in uncovering what's happening in the world of consumers, market, brand, et cetera, and product insight. So, Viv, thank you for being here today. And we also have the rest of the panel will be here in person. I'd like to first introduce Dan Carlson, who is the Vice President of Finance for GRT. Dan is responsible for accounting, human resources, technology, and data analytics. That's a lot to be responsible for, Dan, and we're very happy to have you here today with us. He's been an executive for over 10 years in management and leadership team. And we also have with us Baylen Springer. Baylen, please come join us. He is the CEO of Ready Signal. Baylen has over 20 years experience in the marketing and analytics world, in the data science world, from product development. Prior to being the CEO of Ready Signal, he was a chief product officer, and so he has a great understanding of leveraging data analytics. And then last and certainly not least, we have Tom Thomas, who's the Vice President of Data Strategy, Analytics, and Business Intelligence. Tom has over 25 years experience in being an executive, consultant, entrepreneurial in the digital world, working with advertising, mobile applications, ERP solutions in the automotive space. So have some very interesting context here. So I want to say thank you for joining us in person. Thank you there joining us virtually. And Will, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. And I think everybody on the screen should then see these individuals that have joined us here. So thank you very much. And if you do have questions, please remember to ask those questions.
How about we do this? Why don't we get started at the highest 10,000 foot level? And I'd love each of you to say a little bit about yourselves and what you're up to within the context of where are you within your artificial intelligence and growth marketing journey? And then after that, we'll dig into some of the details. So why don't we start with you, Vivek, since you're the only other one on screen. I'm biased.
You know, we started the practice about 4 years ago. I like to use the human growth metaphor of crawl, walk, run. We've probably gotten out of, you know, when I first started it 4 years ago, I would always joke that we're the baby that just discovered it could roll off its back, let alone yet starting to crawl. I think we're moving from the stage of crawling to walking and soon to be running. We use machine learning and analytics and data science throughout every aspect. We think of ourselves as a go-to market team, not just a marketing team. And it may sound a little cheeky in some degree, but it's really meant to think about how we use data. It's how we grow the business. It's how we drive more customers into our store. How do we make most of those transactions as profitable as we possibly can? And then how do we connect it with consumer engagement, the way that we reach, connect, and push them in the store. So that's a little bit of a high level of what we're doing.
Brilliant. And for those live in the room, why don't we go left to right? Yeah, whatever's y'all's left.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me now? There we go.
There
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Thomas. I run analytics, data strategy, and business intelligence at FordDirect. FordDirect is basically a joint venture between Ford Motor Company and the roughly 3,800 dealerships, Ford and Lincoln dealerships in North America, and we are the primary digital solutions and digital marketing and advertising solutions provider for the dealer network. So we run the whole gamut of digital marketing and advertising products, website, platform, direct communications, choice-based advertising program, and then we offer a variety of in-store dealership solutions like inventory management and CRM systems. And my job at FordDirect is really to make sure we have the right people, process, and technology to manage all of the customer response and other performance metrics around those products to make sure that we're giving the best service and best solutions to our dealers, as well as helping them engage with the customers that they're dealing with from a vehicle sales and service standpoint. And as far as artificial intelligence and machine learning goes, we're really kind of starting out in that space, in particular as we have access to all that customer data that as shoppers and vehicle shoppers as well as service shoppers are interacting with the dealer's digital ecosystem as well as Ford's digital marketing ecosystem. We're able to capture all that data, and our main objective is really stitch that all together into a format that makes sense, and then run machine learning and AI models on the top of that so we can figure out where they are in their journey and ultimately feed those insights to either people or machines in terms of the machines that support some of those products that we sell to dealers today to offer the most personalized and dynamic experience for the customer and offer them that next best action or put them in that right audience for advertising so that we can drive more business for the dealers and for Ford Motor Company in the long run. So, on to you. That's to the right of me.
It's pretty early for us to be confusing right and left, but I am Baylen Springer. I'm the CEO of Ready Signal. We're a data as a service company that curates and normalizes and profiles data to apply data science treatments to really help supplement predictive modeling efforts. In our overall growth, kind of marketing trajectory right now, I would say we are below the 0.003% of your petri dish, Will. Like very, very early stage, and so just really starting to get, getting started. However, in my previous life, I spent a bunch of time doing marketing mix models for clients, and I saw a lot of clients coming in who had a pretty firm grasp on their early stage growth, and we're starting to look to scale. So I'm hoping to personally draw from some of that learning that I saw clients as they were trying to grow and scale their marketing, and then both share some insight today and hopefully use it to help Ready Signal grow as well.
Awesome.
Good morning. I'm Dan Carlson. I'm the VP of Finance at GRT Financial. We're a small company located just outside of Detroit. We help consumers get out of credit card debt. And we're mainly a business-to-business company, so we're not doing a lot of the front-end marketing. But we're going to use the data analytics that we receive to ultimately help our marketing partners do their job better to effectively bring more consumers to our door. From a data analytics and machine learning, AI, we're in really early stages as well. Just within the last 3 years, we partnered with Domo and RXA to ultimately take us to the next level. We love data. We're a data-driven company, and we realized how hamstrung we were without actual platforms to really drive into the data to make the decisions that we wanted to make on a daily basis. And so I hope to bring that perspective here today.
That is awesome. And I'm so excited about this because we've got both emerging new business models that are at the cutting edge of what's going on right now, as well as more traditional organizations and people in different places of the value chain, all of which are using marketing and artificial intelligence to drive growth. And so the question becomes, especially since many of you are somewhat early in this journey, is tactically, practically, where'd you get started? And I guess I'll toss this to Baylen first.
Yeah, I think just from a pure marketing standpoint of what I'm currently experiencing, as well as what I've seen in some of my past work, is I think getting started takes I look at it from three different phases, I guess, right? It's one, just making sure to have a good, sound strategy with good objectives, because I think it's too easy. Like, there are so many ways to get started with, marketing in general, but if you haven't really solidified your objectives, you really aren't going to know, did you accomplish what you were trying to achieve? It's easy to get off and running and kick off some paid search campaigns or do some Facebook, so many self-service things. But before you do that, like, what is my strategy? What am I trying to achieve? And just how do I get that put in place first and foremost? And then I think the other side of the equation, right, is I think that both yourself and Colin mentioned earlier as well, is how do you, especially in the early stage, how do you put together a good, sound data strategy and infrastructure that's going to set you up for success in the future? Mainly because, when you're getting started, it's easy to see results in terms of growth, from marketing. As you start to scale, that's when it starts to get a little trickier, and that's when you're going to have to start leaning into these machine learning and AI practices. And if you didn't set up your data strategy, from the beginning to take advantage of that, you're going to kind of be, 2 steps back before you can take another step forward.
Yeah, that's a real good point. So, Vivek, you've been at this for a minute. So, how did you think about setting up your data strategy when you got started?
To take one step back and building off what some of the other folks are talking about, I think you have to establish a clear vision and goals, and it has to be concrete. Sometimes it's funny how many times we've all met vendors probably that come in and they have these ethereal kind of points of view and all the magic and hocus pocus that can be accomplished. Mm-hmm. But what you got to focus really on is concretely, what are the objectives you want to achieve? What are the concrete goals that you want from your solution, and how do those concretely ladder into the business goals and objectives, which leads into the second thing is, because you got to get alignment. You got to get alignment with all the key stakeholders, whether they're peers or above you, to make sure that everybody's bought in. And when you make it concrete and you can demonstrate how it ladders in, either directly or indirectly into the business goals, you gain that alignment and you gain their understanding and you gain their support. And then the next part is identifying the infrastructure. What is the infrastructure you need? Most of us started with nothing. What's the very first thing that you got to do? What's the first step? And then, part of that infrastructure is the people. Identifying a roadmap for how you bring on the talent, what's the kind of talent you need, and what time frame are you going to bring them in? And the last one I think is important is the mistake that people often make, and I've been guilty of this in the past too, is, you get so excited by the opportunity that you start to boil the ocean. And, and the key is don't boil the ocean, but what you can do is boil the ocean one bucket at a time. And what I really mean by that is, it start with very simple, concrete applications or tests or scenarios. Succeed with that. Pick out the next one. Have a roadmap of how you're going to build. How does A lead into B that leads into C? And then all of a sudden, a couple of things that'll happen is, one, you'll gain credibility and currency and with your vision and the objective solution that you're trying to achieve. People get excited by it. You're also learning along the way as you expand, rather than trying to do something very complex, very big, all of a sudden. So that's kind of the way we approach it. And, even 4 years later, we're still doing it the same old way.
Yeah, got to build buy-in through those quick wins, make it concrete and tangible. So, Tom, why don't you talk about, if you can, what were some of the immediate applications that you used to really demonstrate how concrete and valuable this new approach is?
Well, first of all, I 100% agree with everything that Vivek just said, because that way of thinking is the only way I've been able to see or make any progress, at FordDirect around this area. And specifically to your question, it really is a little bit about the art of the possible, right? So not everybody in the company could really realize the unique data position that FordDirect had and what it could actually do in terms of understanding the customer better, because of where it sat in this sort of business framework between the OEM and all these 3,800 dealers. So So in our case, it's 100%. You need a business case, right? You either need a problem to solve or something to enhance. And in our case, it was a little bit more on the latter, like something to enhance. And it took a group of people inside FordDirect to really help evangelize that art of the possible by essentially manually telling the story of what you could do with data if you were able to rip through, let's say hundreds or maybe thousands of events or signals from a customer that we were able to pick up across their sort of journey, right? Synthesize that into a real life story and show the executives and the leadership of the company, not just at FordDirect, but at Ford, look, we can actually pick up and understand what the customer is doing throughout a fairly long period of time in their shopping journey or in their journey for looking for service. And how do we take that information and help the dealers make a better connection with those customers through those channels? So, when we started that out, I had a couple really talented individuals, and one in particular who did a great job of, over the course of a couple days, go to roughly 8 or 9 different data sources, stitch that data across those sources manually for, let's say, a particular customer, and then visualize that into a story via PowerPoint and with a lot of crafty visuals. And so that people sort of woke up and go, wow, that could be really powerful. What are all the opportunities and what are all the use cases can we gain from that information, right? So it got everybody really excited, and also it somewhat drove, the positioning of a new product suite, where because FordDirect doesn't control the actual advertising and the digital channels that exist basically for customers to interact with. We have to actually partner with the best of breed partners out there in the dealer industry for advertising and direct marketing and communications and dealer DMS systems and things like that. But we put our hooks into all those different partnerships because they control the signals. They actually capture the signals of the customer, but we bring all those into our own data store, and which allows us to see all of that together. So how do we use that ability to understand the customer journey in the situation where we're somewhat disconnected from the customer one step, but are able to then put that back out into our partnership's hands or our partners' hands so that they can use it in the best way possible to make that better connection with the customer. So our AI and ML initiative is essentially, as we look at each of those customers' journeys, whether it's hundreds or thousands of events that we're picking up from them, how do we get through that data quickly? How do we create a layer of metadata on top of that so you can make sense of that journey and to turn it into a profile? And then from that profile, how do we synthesize that into things that really matter? Propensity to purchase, propensity to service, vehicle of interest, and then initiating what's the next best action for that customer with whatever channel they show up in next.
These are some great best practices, and I want to point out that a lot of people think that to get started with AI, you actually have to get started with AI, but you did best practice, make a prototype, manually stitch it together, create a storyboard, show people what's possible, and think about the customer journey, not devices and data necessarily. So I'm wondering, kind of shifting over to Dan, how do you use data to get people out of credit card debt, and can you take my number?
I'll definitely take your number. How do we use data to get people out of credit card debt? I mean, when we're looking at data, obviously I'm in the finance department, so I'm looking at the money. But when you're dealing with credit card debt, there's a lot of different creditors out there. How are they going to respond to where the consumer is at? We're ultimately looking for the best time to ultimately reach out to a creditor. We want to understand what are we used to seeing them settle at. Our main way of getting people out of credit card debt is ultimately through settling for less than the full balance. So ultimately, we have years of experience. We have thousands, tens of thousands of past successes where we've done this, and understanding, hey, we can identify which consumer or which creditors are better to attack, say earlier in a consumer's life journey with us, or what's going to be later. We know how much we're going to need to save in order to handle that. We can identify ultimately how much money does a consumer need to be putting away each month to save in order to be successful in the program. So those are definitely some of the indicators that we look at as we're doing that. And then ultimately being able to relay that information back to our marketing partners as they're ultimately doing the marketing. They want to know which consumers to try to attract. And so as we've gone down this path, we've started looking at what customers are successful and what are the attributes that are making them successful. Is there a certain age bracket? Is there a bracket of debt? Is it an income bracket? Is it a creditor mix, right? And so you can, with the power of Domo and these platforms, you can really start diving into this data. And the frustrating thing is it takes a long time, right? Like it's not just hey, flip it on and boom, wow, look at all this data. I mean, it's a journey. For us, you got to be patient. You know, I mean, you can get there. There's going to be failures along the way. There's going to be challenges. But if you're patient and you continue down that path, you can find a lot of helpful information.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm curious about, and maybe let's go to Vivek for this one, is, you know, you're in an industry where so much of what's important is data, kind of like Tom was saying, that's not necessarily being generated by you. And I'm wondering, within your growth marketing journey, how have you incorporated some of these external data signals or partnerships in a way that sort of helped advance your maturity?
You know, it's interesting. First of all, I think one thing I would also add is to be successful with this, and it depends on each company's structured a little bit differently. You have to have a really positive, strong, healthy relationship with IT, because you're not going to be able to do it all by yourself. And when I joined Belle Tire, there were a couple of things that enticed me to join and made it a very positive experience. Number one, the fundamentals of the business weren't broken. It's not like I was being hired to come in and fix something.
Right.
It's a 100-year-old company, solid, great growth trajectory. It's, you know, there's no voodoo I have to do to solve a problem with business. Secondly, they had a incredibly deep data pool and database that they had been curating for the last decade. They just they weren't ready yet to do something with it. So we inherited that. Now, the other challenge we did have, Will, is in our category, there aren't a lot of metrics. There aren't like a Nielsen or an Arbitron that tell you market share or connect all the dots for you. And that was part of the infrastructure that we had to do. We had to determine, you know, based on what our goals and objective, what it is that we need to pull in. Because again, we couldn't pull everything in. You know, we're not a Fortune 10 company, although we're going to be growing very fast. We're not a Fortune 10 company with, you know, resources to throw at it. So we had to be very judicious and then always build that business case. If I bring in this data, what am I going to be able to do with it? And what is the return on investment that's going to happen? Not only with the data sources, but also with the infrastructure that was required to demonstrate what are we going to do with the data? How are we going to make the data actionable? So having great data and being able to have a lot of great knowledge, but not being able to do anything with it, with connecting with consumers in whatever channel or connecting the dots, there really isn't much value in just having great data that you know something about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads nicely to the next question here, which is, I think all of us, whatever it is that we've been mastering, whatever it is that we've been working on in our journey, can kind of look back a couple of years and say, ugh, I wish I hadn't have done that. And I think a lot of the people in the audience today can maybe learn from some of the things that we wish we could have gone back and thought about differently. So I'd love to kind of talk to each of you about what is one of the biggest learnings that you've had in this journey that you wish you could go back and do a little bit different? Baylen, why don't you start us off?
Oh man, how much time do we have?
Not much.
One thing that does come to mind, I think, relates to a point you made earlier too, Will, is around domain knowledge. I come from an analytics and product background, and I spent many hours tucked into a dark closet somewhere, cranking out, analytics and building models and all that stuff, and and bring it out to present to the stakeholders with all this amazing work that I was so proud of, and be like, all right, and it says to do X, Y, and Z, and they kind of looked at me like, you idiot, that's great, and that's not even possible to do, so there was a disconnect between like reality in terms of like, oh yeah, certainly this type of inventory from a marketing standpoint works, but we're maxed out at that, and you didn't take that into account, or you didn't understand that aspect of it. And so I think it was always, and frankly, I've learned this lesson a couple times. It is important to be, from an analytics and AI perspective, to be collaborative with those stakeholders so that you can take into account any constraints that you wouldn't be aware of, because a media planner is in that stuff day to day. They know what inventory is available or what can be acted upon, and so you don't like do all this work to present something that actually can't be actionable. And certainly it's not to discount the insight that comes out of that, but and I think even Colin mentioned that, like, all that comes from here's what's worked in the past, but you need to put that layer upon, like, how can we utilize that to make decisions moving forward and make actionable decisions today and tomorrow and next week.
Any of that resonate with you, Tom, or what do you wish you could go back and do differently?
I think if our data scientists were here, I think they would have liked to have explored sort of the auto ML features and functionality that were out there earlier than later. So we were using a lot of hand purpose models, using plugins, R plugins, and either Alteryx or Domo and things like that. And with some of the more advanced auto machine learning functions and features that are out there in products like Databricks or Data Robot, that would have maybe allowed us to prototype faster earlier. And then would have been able to sort of prove things out a little bit more quickly and have a little bit more tangible results, to move to the next phase of things or to gain more budget for the next stage. I think we're there now, but early on, we just didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah, you got to always be deploying, always prototyping. So what about you, Dan?
Yeah, no, I wish I had sat in on listening to this panel, just because we are literally so new, just a couple of years ago, because we're so new to this, the thought process of picking the right project first. I mean, we went and tackled what we thought was the coolest, biggest, best idea first, right? Which, when it's done, it's going to be amazing, right? We're going to realize all these things, but when you're doing that, you have to be realistic of your time frame. And so that's okay, but you have to be patient. The leadership team is going to have to be on board with the time frame that's going to take, the resources, et cetera, so that you can ultimately get to that end result. And so I was definitely, I would, if I go back, pick some easy wins that are going to show the team immediately time savings, cost savings, lowering that CPA, whatever it might be, so that you can continue to get that buy-in. Because the longer a project drags on, even though the end is going to be great, it gets more and more difficult to wait it out and to want to continue to invest.
Yeah, especially when you're getting started, you can't be the snake that's trying to swallow a horse. It's not going to work out so well. So, Vivek, any of this resonate with you, or what could you go back and change?
It absolutely does, and I'm not as sophisticated or smart as some of the panelists are with this, but there's a fundamental thing that I wish I had done better, which is I wish I had not made the mistake of assuming that everybody understood the same language, or that the words I was using or the things I was portraying that everybody fully understood, or that we had the same definition. The joke I used to have, and my friend at FordDirect will appreciate this a little bit, like, you would think that a tire unit would have one definition or one methodology for calculating it, but that was a silly assumption. Finance might have a different definition than operations might have for procurement, that might have from a business perspective. And again, I use that a little tongue in cheek, which is, don't assume these things. I mean, it's a very humbling experience. And, if you are willing to be humble and make sure that everybody's on the same page, you'll avoid many of the pitfalls of miscommunication, misunderstanding, or misinterpretation that are these really silly things that can derail a project or erode confidence or erode belief or erode alignment.
Yeah,
And it's also a really, Tom, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing to what Vivek said is I think managing assumptions is one of the biggest challenges. So even when that evangelizing story that I talked about earlier, you have to be careful because you tell this very pictorial story about what the art of possible is. You don't know how many people might assume that already is possible, that it's already there, it's already built, right? And we're talking about something we figured was probably going to maybe take a couple years, but not everybody quite understood that. And we also ourselves didn't know exactly how long it would take. So just making sure that everybody's still grounded in reality can be a little bit challenging when you're trying to hype up, where the company could go strategically and to manage, where things actually are in reality today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good forward-looking lesson too, because one of the best ways to really innovate in your space is to question all of those assumptions, flip them on their head, take nothing for granted. And so when it comes to, let's kind of dig down a little bit deeper here. Let's think about measurement. And so in the marketing world, we've got vanity metrics and we've got business metrics. And sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. And sometimes we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater with some of what we might derisively refer to as vanity metrics. So I'm wondering, maybe let's start with Dan here. What are your KPIs and how do you think about measuring your efforts and success?
I had to start with me on this one. Let's see.
Pass?
Hey, I'll pass. Well, when I just think about these types of metrics, I think the first thing is important that it's company first, and as you get into your different departments, especially marketing, different roles, right? You don't want to just it's not just about making yourself look good, making your department look good, trying to find something that you're going to kind of gloss over and see things look great on the outset. Ultimately, needs to be company first. Key point indicators for us, let's see. This wasn't on the list of questions, so.
Well, you don't have to throw out all.
Wait, isn't that
the
industry
KPIs.
secret? Maybe I can go with that's industry secrets. No,
Industry secret. Well, let's talk. Not necessarily KPIs if we don't want to get into it, but thinking about like your outcome-oriented business goal. How about we reframe it like that and go to Baylen.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I start to think about this stuff, like ultimately, for me personally, like I need people to sign up for the platform and to be actively using it. And so, but there is also a chain of events that lines up to that, right? And so, there's, to your point of vanity metrics, some marketing, like simple things just like video views of ads and stuff, those are valuable, but they may not turn into active users within, certainly within one click or within a day or maybe even a week, and so, and I've seen this in the past too, right? It's how do you understand how all of those vanity or all those kind of additional kind of upper funnel metrics ultimately relate to the bottom line, and then how do you communicate that to the stakeholders? Because kind of what we were talking about before, right? From a marketing perspective, like fundamentally, you shouldn't need a lot of analytics to know your marketing is working. Like the CEO should just see, like you turn marketing on and business has grown. Like you should be thinking about analytics, how to like optimize that, how to refine it, how to make it better. Like if you're relying upon some like very sophisticated fancy models to somehow justify it, you're in big trouble. And then, and I think similar to some of the other conversations earlier today, it's like, tying all these things together, that is a long, complicated process. It requires a lot of data. It requires a lot of, time and effort to bring all those things together. And so, setting expectations around what that looks like, and then in a plan to understand how does video views ultimately relate to possibly awareness consideration, and how do those softer metrics result in longitudinal, sales down the road. Because I've seen this dozens of times in my career in terms of, walking in with all these reports and all these we've got, video views are great, click-through rates are great, blah, 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 and the CMO will be like, you're telling me everything's great and my sales are in the tank, what is going on? And so to me, it's just rallying around, common, language around objectives and how to build a measurement plan, how things are supposed to work together. And, even if you don't have those answers immediately, what is your plan to think about how some of these vanity metrics will relate to sales over time? It's not easy, and, it requires some work and some time and some patience, and there's some communication around setting expectations from that perspective as well.
Yeah. Vivek, as our CMO in the room, how do you think about this?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what everybody said, but maybe add a small little spin to it. There are metrics that move the business. And what we call at Belle Tire, there's the sausage-making metrics that enable us to do our jobs a little bit better. Mm-hmm. The mistake we make is, as marketers, we love the sausage-making metrics. Mm-hmm. Because it's what we do, right? It's how we improve things incrementally each day and each week. And the mistake we make is we start the conversation there. And going back to what was just stated by everybody so far is, keep it simple. We start every conversation with the board, with ownership, with with our executive leaders, everybody, analysts, you name it. Are we driving more people into the store? Are we driving more people into the website? Are we getting incrementally more people? Are we increasing gross profit on a per transaction basis? And start there. Very simple things that everybody can really understand. And then once we demonstrate those things, then if somebody asks the question how or why, we can get to that next level of the sausage making. And that's again, I wish I'd learned this. I like what you just said. It's I wish I had this seminar earlier. That's the mistake you make, early in your career, is you get so enamored. And I think that's why, Will, you're calling it bandy. You get so enamored with that sausage making. Shouldn't you? I need a pat on the back. I'm so proud of how we've gotten, this score to go up, and how we've gotten this thing to become more efficient. And we forget, okay, that's all interesting, but all I really care about is, did it move the business forward? And how did it move the business forward, and why did it move it forward?
You got to connect those KPIs to real life. And Tom, how do you think about this?
Yeah, very similar way. We have established one of our first measurement plans around our sort of data science and machine learning initiatives, and it's really looking at two different types of KPIs. The first, if you have your project associated to a business case, really our focus is about how do we improve the performance of our products that already exist. So the KPIs are really not new. It's really more about the value of the KPIs pre and post what you've put in place. So we're very focused on our advertising program right now. How do we use machine learning to go through all the customer data that we have and understand where those customers are, so that we can shift them into the right types of segments, into the right audiences. And then we essentially automatically provide those audiences to our 6 advertising partners. And this is a very automated process. So when we look at, did we deliver a better audience to our digital agency, and how did that audience perform for the dealership, we're still looking at cost per click, click-through rates to the website. We're looking at cost per lead. We're hoping all those metrics start to come down, and do those leads that are generated from those audiences, do they have a higher close rate, right? Do they result in more sales and service and ultimately revenue for the dealer? So it goes all the way back down to the business. So everything is connected to that same sort of measurement, not necessarily a new KPI, but does the needle move in the existing KPIs that we should be measuring those products with in the first place? However, there are some new KPIs that we came up with to measure the process itself. So these are more efficiency metrics or operational metrics. Before it would take us, let's say, 12 hours to create a customer journey or to create a profile on the raw time series data that we're putting together for a customer journey. That if that's now brought down to minutes or seconds, we've obviously gained efficiencies in resource cost and time and things like that. So we're able to use a wider variety of audiences now for our agencies and for our customers, our dealers. And we're able to more accurately, let's say, target those customers because of the audiences they're in. So the wider the variety, the better, the more accurate the segmentation. If we only could do 3 audience types before, we're now able to do 20. That's a win. So those are the more operational and new KPIs that we've somewhat created since we started this.
I love that. And the great point about this is that oftentimes efficiency metrics open up new possibilities, because if you can go from mapping a customer journey in 12 hours to 12 seconds, then think about what new kind of actions you're able to take in your business and how much more you can scale it. I think that's brilliant. So why don't we think about a time when you've been sitting on a Zoom call or in a boardroom and you've got a vendor in front of you and they're promising you the most magical experience that you could ever have. They're promising you that they will resurrect the dead or something like that. I'm wondering, how do you really, separate the buzzwords from the real stuff when you're trying to evaluate the kinds of tech that you're looking at? Because it's not so simple. I mean, like a couple of years ago, I was saying at an AI conference that I thought auto ML was, not going to be a real thing for 5 or so years, and now look at it. Look how far it is. So how do you think about separating reality and buzzwords? Baylen, you want to crack at this?
Yeah, I think it's like the implementing auto ML or artificial intelligence is also not a business strategy. That's a tactic, and I think it is, to your point, it's very easy to sit in front of all these bells and whistles and be like, oh my gosh, I need this. But if you maybe don't know why you need that, you might want to hit pause. And so, maybe ways I've seen to address these situations is having a very concrete, specific problem that I'm trying to solve and making sure these vendors can show me how their technology can solve that problem with, and frankly, pressing them to get a sense of give me a proof of concept with my data. Show me something with my data, so I'm not blinded by all the fancy stuff that's been curated and works seamlessly end to end, and really trying to press on here's my specific problem, and can you help provide some sort of proof of concept or some sort of prototype that I can react to and make a decision to figure out if this is going to solve my problem.
Anybody else have an experience like this, or want to tell some tales out of school about the craziest vendor pitch they've ever heard?
Well, I'm not going to tell a story about a crazy pitch or anything, but just being new to this space, and my background is not tech. I'm not like a tech-driven background. More numbers, different things. And so everything basically in this space was a buzzword, right? You bring out the word AI, data science, ML, BI, when we were just 2-3 years ago on the cusp of getting into this, that all sounded really cool, really sexy. That's what we need to have. And we just heard, you probably need to know why you need that. And make sure, like someone else said, that you're using the same terminology. Because before you know it, you're down a path that maybe you didn't intend to get down to. You're chasing something that maybe you don't need to chase at the moment. It's not the right time until you've truly studied that out and truly understand what you're getting to. So if you're just a business professional who's trying to oversee, say, a department, you're trying to build something, really make sure that you understand that. We all know, as being vendors ourselves, when you're in the room and on that Zoom call, you are the expert, and so you're trying to wow that person, right? You're going to use the biggest words that you can, to impress them. And so as a business professional, I would just encourage you, go back, don't say yes in the meeting. go back, truly, go back, research those terminologies, make sure you understand, because that'll help you as you make your decisions.
Tom, you ever run into any challenges like this? What are your thoughts on the subject?
I mean, I'll just quickly say that I think pretty much the questions that you're asking of this panel, I would just flip it to the next vendor presentation and have them try and answer those. I think you're going to see a lot in terms of where their maturity is, how realistic they are, and whether they have any real proof of doing, what they're claiming to be able to do, and in terms of what they've done in the past. So I'm always very interested in their case studies. What have they done, for other clients? How did they measure it? What were the business results? But also, questions like this, asking them how, we should, let's say, tackle growth. What justifies, taking on an initiative and doing those kinds of things. I think when they try to answer those, if they come up short, that'll tell you a lot. And and if they do try to answer it, it'll also prove a lot in terms of their experience in actually doing this. Because ultimately, you want a partner that can help you in multiple ways, not just being able to install a technology or build a model or something like that. It really proves that they know how to get involved to a point where they can start to understand your business and help you see, the forest through the trees, sort of thing. So,
amen.
I'd also mention, I think transparency is key these days as well. I think gone are the times where you could accept an answer of oh, we've got this proprietary thing that we can't tell you how it works, but you should buy it, and people are oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll do that. But I think multi-touch attribution, for example, was a very kind of went through that whole cycle of having these very proprietary things that couldn't be shared, and then people would try to implement them and get frustrated and it just wouldn't work. And so I think even before getting involved in with a vendor or technology is really pressing on transparency and asking for transparency, because you're paying for something. You should fully be aware of how it works and how it's going to interact with your business and your data and that type of thing as well.
Building off the comment of transparency, one thing I would encourage everybody is don't be afraid of what you don't know, and ask the questions and there's a question we ask to that vein all the time. And it varies a little bit, what was the biggest mistakes that some of your clients have made? And what can we learn from it? What should we learn from it? Another variation that we've asked point blank is, what is your greatest mistake? How would you have done it differently? What went wrong? What did you learn from it? How did you deploy going forward? Just asking questions like that, you'll get a sense of, is it a bunch of fluff that they're talking about? Are they partners that really can get in deeply and understand where the mistakes are made? Can you learn from it? Even if you decide they're not the right partner, you're going to learn from those mistakes along the way and avoid the pitfalls that many of us have made. That's the important part is, you're not alone in trying to do this. Whether you have an organization you can join, a partner that can connect you with other people, asking them to talk to their not just good clients and references, but the clients that they had to struggle with and succeed and win back over, to understand what they had to do and what went wrong. Those are the questions we ask all the time. We don't want references. We really want to talk to the people that they had to save the business with.
Yeah, absolutely. In our last few minutes here, let's think about something that's been in the news here quite a bit, which is ethical artificial intelligence. And so how do we think about growing at the rate that we're expected to grow, the rate that we're forecasting, while doing it in a way that is both ethical, transparent, and explainable? Baylen, you wanna take this?
I sure was hoping you weren't going to ask me this. That's a good question. I keep coming back to where I keep landing is full transparency. I think the ethical piece comes with that. But yeah, if whether I'm building something or engaging with something, I want full transparency and understanding. And I think if I have that building block, then the scale that follows, I think I can feel comfortable with. So I might have to think about this a little bit more, but that's my first thoughts.
Brilliant. Who else has some thoughts on this?
So I would say that it's interesting because FordDirect's actually put a lot of time into starting to think about this, and it goes along the same lines with consumer privacy and CCPA acts and GDPR and things like that, because we have to be very careful and compliant with that, as does Ford Motor Company, and so we have a really good legal and compliance team that works really well with our IT department, really works well with the analytics team and the product team, and so everybody's really on board with trying to do this the right way. And I would say that to avoid things like ethical or bias risk and things like that, some of the same steps that you would take if you try to apply any AI or machine learning into your environment, and that is like three things. You really shouldn't have a black box situation. You should be able to see how the algorithms and how the models actually work. The second piece is really understand the data that you're feeding it, right? So we're in the middle of a project right now that's sort of a sub project to the sort of the customer journey profiling, which is we get the audio files and transcripts for about 700,000 calls to the dealership, phone calls to the dealerships across all those dealers a month. And so we're basically running that through an LP engine, and where we're basically trying to understand what those phone conversations are about. Are they about sales? Are they about service? Are they about parts? And then that classification then can hopefully move towards like entity detection. So if we're talking about a sales call, is it about an F-150? Is it about a Explorer? What is the vehicle type and things like that. So, but to do that right, you kind of have to understand, what are the nuances in those conversations, and particularly usually around branding. So with any type of company, you have this unique sort of language that might be used by the customer when they're looking for a product. So you have to create this sort of lexicon, or a reference table to help make sure that NLP engine is working properly and deciphering the conversation into the right type of call, right? So if somebody talks about, a Maverick, it's not going to interpret it as a rogue individual or a cowboy or something like that. It's a mid-sized truck, right? And it's that one of the famous Ford ones is, Lincoln was shot in the Ford theater versus a Lincoln being shot at a Ford dealer, right? So deciphering that properly, it kind of goes along with the same, the same methodology as you would try to work out any kind of ethical bias and things like that. The third piece is also always review your results to see where the model and the machine learning is essentially taking the conclusions, right? So when you're asking, customers for their zip code, that can lead to a lot of different biases around, socioeconomic categorizations and things like that. So one of the cool things we just did recently is we had, we promoted the viewing of this Coded Bias movie that's on Netflix right now, and I recommend anybody here that's listening to this to watch that, because it's actually a great education into artificial intelligence and machine learning activity that's going on around the world. So you quickly learn that, from a privacy standpoint, that there's a lot out there about you that you probably don't know is happening from a governmental standpoint and from a business standpoint, and there's no regulation and control over it. And it's not just regulation and control over it misclassifying you as a person, but it also makes a ton of mistakes. There's just no real measurement of, is it doing what it's supposed to do. So there are some nonprofit organizations that are trying to help companies weed their way through this path so that they're looking at their data in the right way, that they're feeding these machine learning models, and so that they're not black boxes like the Algorithmic Justice League, AI Now, that's out in New York. There's a whole bunch of them that are exploring this, that have really spun off from this movie. So we've been kind of starting to take a more concerted effort in FordDirect to focus on that. possibly starting like a bias risk mitigation group, that helps us do the right thing when we're taking all these customer signals and advertising them to them in the right way and setting up the right experience for them when they're, shopping for a vehicle or trying to get car service.
I love it. That is a very advanced way to think about it. And so as we wind down, why don't we see if we have any questions here from the audience? Otherwise, we can dive back in for a minute more and wrap up. All right. So I'm guessing that's enough. But go ahead and enter your questions, guys, if you have them. So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, what I'd love for each of you to do is to speak to the version of yourself a couple of years ago when you were getting started. What's one piece of parting advice that you'd like to leave with everybody here who's just embarking upon this journey? Let's have all of you kind of give a parting thought on this. And Vivek, since we started with you at the beginning, why don't we start with you on the final round as well?
Well, I wish I could pass on that one for a moment and just think about that some more too. Be patient. Be patient and do a lot more listening than talking. I think that's really, and I guess the third one I would say is don't be afraid to fail as long as you fail fast and you learn something from it to apply to the next assignment. But yeah, patient, listen, and don't be afraid to fail, because sometimes I think as marketers we have to always pretend or provide a facade that we're always going to succeed, and we're not always going to be right. But the key is, what did you learn from it? How did you apply it? And how do you turn it into a victory long-term that impacts the business? Yeah. So I'm not sure I have anything more valuable than that.
It's good advice. Tom, what about you?
I think it's important to set the expectation that it's okay to think big for tomorrow, but focus on reality today.
Over to you, Baylen.
I would tell myself, keep it simple. And whether that's from like what we talked about earlier about the actual tactical component of tackling simple containable projects to show progress and iterate upon that to show success, all the way to communication to stakeholders. Like, keep that simple. I am one who tortures people with details, and I can see them like I lose them all the time. I'm probably doing it right now. But learning to keep that communication simple. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we accomplished. Let's do more of this. Go. Instead of being like, here's all the great stuff I did to get here. And so yeah.
Awesome. And Dan, the final word.
All right. A lot of these things we've already kind of said, but the patience is important, but really getting the base, your framework, everything set up correctly out of the gate. As you're picking that project, really making sure that all the departments, the people that are going to be working on it, everyone's working from the same set of understanding, the same language like we talked about, really taking time with like the analytics page that you're going to be developing, all the framework, the foundation for the project. I know, when we started our project, I was like, that's a lot of tech speak. That's too many pages. I'll just kind of let someone else read that. And frankly, especially if you're leading the project, even if you don't understand everything you're reading, I definitely would encourage you, get in there, truly understand all the way down to the base, especially if you're just taking off on this journey, because it's hard to understand what the machine is doing, everything, unless you truly understand each step of how the base is being formed. And so I think that would be kind of one of the lessons that I've learned that I would impart upon people as they get started.
And just to wrap us up here, for those of you out there who are thinking, what are all these people talking about? This is so complicated, ethics and transparency and multi-touch attribution. Well, think about it like this. Every single one of the people in this room or virtual room, there was a point in their lives where they knew nothing about artificial intelligence or marketing or business. We all started from somewhere. And if you have the grit and the persistence, you will be able to do amazing things using artificial intelligence and, of course, the human computer you got right here. So thank you so much, everybody.